Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Arcane Radio. I'm Sean, the Fork Chop Forker, joined tonight by Lon Strickler, and our guest this evening is going to be Cosmic Ray Keller. Lon, welcome to the show tonight.
That's a great name, isn't it? Cosmic
Cosmic
Ray
Ray, I
Keller.
love it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm doing okay. It's starting to get cold finally. That just got done telling me I might get 2 to 3 foot of snow this weekend, so I'm not happy
Yeah,
about
I'm
that.
sorry. I didn't mean to burst your bubble there. That was my fault.
If I got
Lon
enough
was all
food and toilet
excited.
paper, I'm okay. Uh, yeah, I am not a snow lover.
He's like, why did you tell me that?
Snow's only good for one thing: tracking deer. That's all I've ever said, and that's about it. I mean, and other than that, it's not much to it.
Well, let me tell you, it's so cold here. If anybody in Florida finds my balls, will they please ship them back to me? It is
Yeah, well,
cold.
it's cold. It really is. I
It's too
mean,
cold.
even down here, the Maryland Piedmont, it got cold, and I don't know. It is. It's really cold.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a couple more months before we escape that.
Yeah, really.
But
Man,
man,
I'm
it's been
telling
a
you,
busy
what a great.
week.
It's been a busy 2 weeks. I mean, it's been busy for you. I mean, you open the new business up. That's a lot, and things look like they're going pretty good, though, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. Laura and I, my wife, opened up a new store downtown Williamsport, Pennsylvania, called the Owl Tree Boutique, quality women's and children's clothing. And our new studio is going to be upstairs. So it's going to
Yeah,
work out for everyone.
sure. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And maybe we get things going a little bit better here. It's been kind of iffy, but our last show just kind of went totally south. I don't know what the hell happened.
Well, that was
I,
weird.
I, I still, well, I think it was we had an entity attack myself, but who knows?
Well, I don't know what we had, but I wish it would leave you alone.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know what it is either. I've been checking the lines and just making sure everything's okay. And I mean, everything seems okay. I've been doing checks and everything on the lines, and it seems like it's fine. So who knows? But anyway, what's new with you other than the store and a few other odds and ends?
Well, we got Bigfoot reports coming in here very slowly. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
the first week of February, we're having our Keystone Bigfoot kickoff meeting, which you know about, of course.
yeah. That's right.
We're going to get this
Yeah, you'll
project
have to
going full
remind me so
steam.
I don't forget about it. But yeah, I got the notice. So that's cool.
Anybody who wants more information on the Keystone Bigfoot project can go to keystonebigfoot.com. I'm the principal investigator, director of the project. Lon's one of our advisors. Always looking for people to join up. We want to have boots on the ground. We want to have as much data as possible. It's a real scientific look into the Bigfoot phenomena where we're looking at the data for patterns so we can get better deployment. Maybe get ourselves in position to see a Bigfoot before one's actually in the area. I don't know. That's what we're working at.
So you're keeping the name?
Yeah, we're going to keep the name for the project.
Okay.
I think it's important that we
Yeah.
stick with
No,
one
I
name for
think
the
it is too.
project.
Yeah. Yeah, I got I had a Bigfoot report. Well, it came off a radio show, but
Yeah, let's talk
Crawford
about
County.
that.
I don't know what the hell that was all about, but apparently this guy was up there at the Erie Wildlife Sanctuary or Preserve or something, and I went to look, on the map and then look on the internet about this place. This seems like a pretty nice place. Got a lot of elk and stuff, but it's more designed for birds and waterfowl. And apparently this guy from I forget where he was from. That's I don't know. But anyway, he was in Pennsylvania. He was up there on helping out. So he had his RV uh, hooked up and everything, and apparently the local Bigfoot didn't like him being there, and they were pelting the RV with stones and out there yelling and screaming and whistling and making all kinds of racket. Scared the hell out of the guy.
Well, I
And
guess that's what he gets.
well, he said that he said he had the RV up on a hill, and he thought that that the Bigfoot were situated down the valley, and for some reason they just didn't like him up there. And he said one night they were took the RV and just were rocking it back and forth. He said it was slamming him up against the wall, was rocking that bad. So, this went on for several weeks. The guy couldn't get any sleep, and eventually he had to pull out of it. But it's a pretty interesting read. I posted it today, so the readers will have it tomorrow in the newsletter.
Yeah, it was an
So that
interesting tale. And in fact, I spoke to a couple other Bigfoot researchers to see if they had anything about this guy. And he does have a YouTube channel, and you disclosed
hmm
that in the article.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
guess he's not really new to Bigfooting, but he's having some experiences. Now, some people are saying that he doesn't have very credible evidence. Other folks are saying it's not bad. And I haven't looked at the evidence myself yet, Lon, so I can't really make that assessment. But it's an
So
interesting story nonetheless.
I didn't even go over there and look at it. I didn't even know if he had it up there yet, but I guess maybe he did. I'll have to go look at it and see. But yeah, I mean, he said in the article that it was a transcript from the radio from Darkness Radio, and he said that he had recordings and such. I had to go there and listen to it and watch it, but I don't know. I just took the transcript and put it up there.
Yeah, me too. I have to go and take a look at it myself. And once I see it, I guess I'll make my own assessment on it. We could talk about it again on another show. But it's not the first time we heard about Bigfoot attacking an RV in Pennsylvania.
No, no, we haven't. I mean, you referring to the guy in Dauphin County?
Yeah,
Yeah,
last name Reed.
yeah. I don't know about that, but and that's what he said happened. So I don't know.
Folks, if you hear
Um,
any scratching on the line tonight, I apologize. I'm trying to grow a beard. I'm not used to it yet. So it's like scratching on my face. I apologize.
uh, anyway, I did get some really weird stuff this past couple weeks. Um, oh man, I got rakes and uh, black-eyed people and dogmen in New York, and
I
oh, it's
read that.
crazy.
That Dogman in New
Well, the New
York
York,
story is pretty cool.
that is pretty wild.
The date
Let me
is
go ahead
what's
and
cool.
yeah, it really is. Let me go ahead and read this. It was I got this from a guy by the name of Gerald, lives in New Jersey. I don't know how old Gerald is, but he must have some age to him. Anyway, he said, "Sir, I would like to pass along a true story told to me by my grandfather when I was a young man. The story involves my great grandfather, whose name was James McNamara. He was a patrolman in the New York City Police Department. This incident occurred in October of 1911 during the late evening hours. James was assigned to the theater district in the area of Broadway and 42nd Street. Another patrolman by the name of Dobbins was 2 blocks south on Broadway near 40th Street. And he said theater goers were walking about and enjoying the Great White Way when suddenly there were screams emanating from an alleyway just below James' position. Both patrolmen ran toward the ruckus, forcing their way through hundreds of fleeing pedestrians. As they reached the alleyway, a tall, hairy beast ran out onto Broadway and towards 40th Street. Neither patrol believed what they saw. An 8-foot tall wolf with human like arms and legs running with skill and speed down the middle of Broadway. Soon the beast was facing a New York City Packard squad car, so it changed direction, moving back towards McNamara and Dobbins. The beast was growling as it moved forward. The patrolmen took positions by a newsstand hiding and waiting for the horrible creature to move before them. Soon the beast was at the entrance of another alleyway near 42nd Street. Both patrolmen pulled their revolvers and took deadly aim. The beast quickly dropped to the gutter. Immediately, McNamara and Dobbins surrounded the body as other officers joined them. None of the public was allowed to come within 100 foot of the unknown canine. The body was quickly removed and taken to the mortuary. Both patrolmen were placed on other assignments. The squad was told by their superiors that this was simply mistaken identity and that the deceased was a man in costume. Of course, that was not the truth. The press was later told that a large mad dog caused the disruption and that none of the public were injured. A few months later, a brief article was published in the Louisiana newspaper, the St. Mary Banner in Franklin, Louisiana, and picked up by a few other media outlets. Now, I went and dug out this article. I'm kind of surprised I found it. But, it's pretty close to what he was saying. There was a few odds and ends that weren't. But that's basically what happened. Now, the article itself was fairly short, but it said it was New York. No sign remained in the Broadway Theater District the next morning following the scenes that were enacted there one night when a maddening beast charged up and down, spreading terror and consternation, causing handsomely gowned women to faint and strong men to leave their cocktails untouched and flee for safety. That line with the burning tail that broke loose during the Coney Island fire last spring was a tame affair in comparison with the Broadway monster. The beast is described in the police blotter as a large terrier, but it is evident that the police were anxious to minimize the seriousness of the panic. Hundreds of witnesses will testify that the animal was at least 8 foot tall. Its foaming mouth and wicked fangs were too terrible for description. The beast was seen first at Broadway and 42nd Street. With a blood-curdling bow wow, it rushed up to a beautiful woman as her companion rushed to her assistance and fearlessly planted a kick in the monster's hindquarters. Ki-yi, screamed the wild thing as it tore off down Broadway. At 40th Street, two boys with the foolhardiness of youth tried to seize the animal by its tail. The beast turned upon them and bayed horribly. On to 39th Street, scattering pedestrians right and left raced the great dog, if dog indeed it was. At the corner, he emitted a whine that was even more terrifying than its growl and turned back the way it had come. As the beast ran back, Patrolman McNamara and Dobbins drew their revolvers. Dobbins shot straight and true, and the monster keeled over in the gutter. The police have offered no further statements, and I couldn't find anything else about this thing. So they shut that up pretty good. There was another article later on in the Holbrook News in Holbrook, Arizona, but I tell you, there was nothing I could find anywhere in the East or even around New York or New Jersey or anywhere. So they kept that pretty quiet.
Yeah, they did. But
That was pretty cool.
I love the age of these articles, Lon. I really do.
That too, and I just love the way they, the journalism, the way they speak. I mean, the way they write stuff. It's I don't. It's kind of a sensationalist type thing, but for whatever reason, I think they hit her on the mark this time around. So I don't know. It's kind of hard to believe that something could happen in the middle of the city like that, even though it was over 100 years ago, and not be a lot of record about it. But who knows?
Well, to leave cocktails sit is just a crime in itself.
Yeah.
That thing should have been shot for that. Ruining a good cocktail hour. But what if it was something more than just a dog man, Lon? What if it was one of those cases of a werewolf?
I don't know. That's the first thing I thought. That's exactly what I thought. Maybe it was you know, maybe it was a weird or a werewolf or something. I don't know.
The
But
more I start to watch about documentaries on these things, the more I really wonder that I don't know shit.
well, you know, all we can do is just take the reports and investigate the best we can. Um, you know, this the cryptids phenomena in general. I believe there's some type of well, I say interdimensional, but there's a multiverse thing going on somewhere. That's the only thing I can figure. It's got to be tied, just like Bigfoot and everything else. Why don't we see bodies? Why don't we, they disappear so quickly and such? They're coming in somewhere. How's this thing just dropped in the middle of New York City? You know what I'm saying? Right in Midtown. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's something else.
Uh, that's right by, it's about 5 blocks south of Times Square. So
Broadway.
yeah, yeah. So
I don't get it.
who figures how this thing get in there? So I don't know,
Well, it could have
but
walked,
it's
but
well, it could, I guess, but it is a story that's kind of verified, and and I didn't talk to the witness. I just wrote him back, and he verified it by that. But I had a few questions for him, but he said if you can find an article, but he said I don't know if you're going to be able to find anything. He said I've checked. Well, I went to the Library of Congress and found it. They've got a they've got a an archive there with special newspapers, special stories. And if you go into the whole newspaper, say there's a special headline for the newspaper, well, they just don't put the headline up there. They put the whole paper in there. So that whole day's edition. So now this thing wasn't on the front page. This was kind of like back in the fourth and fifth page. And but I mean, it just didn't get in the New York paper. So
hmm, we'll have to keep looking out for more of these, Lon,
yeah, I am going to look out for it. That kind of stuff really fascinates me.
as our never-ending quest for the dogman continues.
Yeah. Now I got something else the other day. I called the weird man with black eyes. Now
Uh-oh.
this this was really strange. So here goes. Hello, sir. I came across one of your reports concerning black-eyed kids in Pennsylvania. My cousin and I had a very weird experience in September 2011. We both lived in a town of Wolverine, Michigan, and our dads are brothers. My cousin and I have been hunting and camping together since we were 12 years old. We're 2 months apart in age. We had graduated from high school that spring and planned to go camping later in the summer. We finally got permission to use my dad's pop up camper and headed off. We planned to stay a week or so at a place southwest of Mackinac City in the forest near the state park. We drove back into the woods about 4 miles off the main road and set up in a small clearing. Now, we both thought the area looked familiar, but could not recall when we had been there. It was weird because we both commented at the same time to each other. We really didn't have much planned to do other than be together and hike the area. Both of us were going to move away from home the next spring, so we didn't know when we'd see each other again. I'll be honest, for the camping trip was a good excuse to get away from my girlfriend for a while. We didn't do much that first night other than drink a few beers and talk. We were on racks early that night. The next morning, we decided to explore the area. We started about 10 a.m. and headed west towards the lake. We had been walking no more than an hour when we heard someone yelling ahead of us. Now, it didn't sound like they were in trouble, so we cautiously continued walking toward the sound. After 10 minutes or so, the yelling stopped and we never saw anyone. I had a GPS with me, so I figured we'd be able to find our way back pretty easy. We did get crossed up a few times, but we got back to the campsite late afternoon. There was a small creek nearby, so we washed up and started cooking dinner. As we sat to eat, there was a sound of something moving through the trees north of us. There are a lot of small animals in the area, so I figured that's what it was. A few minutes later, we heard thrashing sounds, like something was sweeping at small trees and bushes. Excuse me. Since we were eating, I thought maybe a black bear got wind of our food. Whatever it soon stopped, but every once in a while, it would start up again. Now that night, we could hear the sweeping sound coming from the same area, which really seemed odd to us. The next morning, it was quiet, so we walked in the direction of the noise from the previous night. We didn't see anything, but it did look like something had been kicking up the ground in a few places. We walked back to the campsite and started to eat breakfast. I just wanted coffee, so I went into the pop up and searched for a coffee cup. As I was in there, I heard my cousin say something. I asked what he wanted. He replied that I'd better get out there. I looked through the netting, and there was a tall man with a black tracksuit standing at the edge of the clearing. I stepped out and asked the man if we could help him. He smiled and said, "Maybe I can help you." My cousin and I both looked at each other and kind of laughed. The man started to slowly walk toward us, and I asked what he wanted. He stopped walking and was about 15 feet from us. Now, right away, I noticed that his eyes were totally black and that the tracksuit had caked mud and dirt on it. I asked who he was. He smiled and said, "I'm just taking a walk and meeting people." By this time, I was freaked out, and my cousin walked toward the pop up. I knew he was going to grab his shotgun. The man got a serious look on his face, like he sensed we were alarmed, so he turned and walked towards the woods. At the edge of the clearing, he stopped and turned around and said, "I'll be seeing you boys later," and started to laugh as he moved towards the woods. Well, we didn't need another confirmation like that, or confrontation like that, so we gathered everything and hauled ourselves out of there. We did set up at another area about 70 miles south of there, and we had an enjoyable couple days. But when we get together, we still wonder aloud who the weird black-eyed man was. So that was pretty freaky.
Yeah, I'd say so. You get all kinds of stuff.
I know, I got some really weird stuff.
Rakes and black-eyed
Well,
weirdos and
got a rake too. This is in Laredo, Texas. Now, seems like a lot of stuff that goes on in Laredo, Texas. Uh, a few weeks ago, I posted an account that I believe may have involved the rake I talked about on our last show. And rakes are usually described as like pale humanoids with twisted limbs that stick out from the body at all kinds of odd angles. These nocturnal beings have fingers and then long talons, which it uses to attract its victims. Some rakes are known to haunt people who have had contact with them. I recently received a sighting report from a guy by the name of Chris James of the Laredo Paranormal Research Society, who believes he encountered one of these humanoids. Now, he's referring to the article I had about Penelope, and you remember the Penelope story.
yes, I
Uh,
do.
so here's what he sent me. He said, "My wife and I were returning from San Antonio, Texas, on a Sunday night sometime around May or June." Now, first, people don't know Laredo. Laredo is situated right near the border, so they were going south. My wife had fallen asleep, and so I turned up the radio and drove south, taking I-35 into Laredo. As we approached the north side of town, I turned the cruise control off and dropped down from 65 to 60 to negotiate the curve under the railroad bridge that crossed the interstate. I was in the right-hand lane as I came close to the bridge. That's when I spotted what at first looked like a homeless guy, completely naked, scuttling along the embankment of the road. He was skinny, pale-skinned, and his arms looked emaciated. As I passed him, I had a creepy feeling that something about this person was all wrong. The way he moved, as well as the way his arms and legs were animalistic, more animalistic than human. With 26 years in law enforcement, I thought about stopping and going back to see what this guy was doing. However, with my wife along, it was close to midnight, so I just kept going, figuring the guy was drunk. I told my wife about what I had seen when we arrived at home. She thought it sounded like some drunken guy living underneath the bridge. Now, after meeting, uh, apparently this guy's met me once before. I don't know when. He also listens to the show. When you mentioned the rake and described that people were what people were reporting, I looked at the images on the internet that are reported to be the rake, and sure enough, that is what I saw. The creature was paralleling the road, so I never saw its face or eyes, but the body shape was as close to the drawings as I care to get. Now, every time I approach the railroad bridge, I slow down and take a second look, but so far I've only seen it the one time. He says he's in the process of writing a book about the Radio Paranormal Research Society and going to be publishing soon. Now, Laredo, I tell you, Laredo's over the years has had a lot of strange things. I
Probably
actually
on one
had
of those ley lines.
yeah, I had one of the, yeah, that very well may be. I had uh, a report about a ray-shaped cryptid, flying ray-shaped cryptid, a couple of years back, and he mentioned that to me. And of course, the Tex-Mex UFO corridor kind of goes right through there, and there have been a lot of sightings on both sides of the border, and it's also known for a lot of flying humanoids. I'm pretty sure that, oh, I know for a fact that Ken Gerhardt has mentioned a lot of instances down there himself in his Flying Humanoids book. So there have been a lot of things that have gone on down there, and of course that's southern part of Texas, south of San Jose. I mean, excuse me, not San Jose. San Antonio is known for a lot of weird stuff. Of course, I had those uh, little T-Rex sightings down there. I've had about three of those over the years, and a lot of other odds and ends. So yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on. So this doesn't surprise me.
Well, Lon, you're always going to bring us the latest when it comes to this strange stuff.
Well, I even got another Mothman report too.
Another.
Yeah, this was down in Dallas. No,
Texas?
San Antonio. San
Wow.
Antonio.
Weird
Yeah, this
Texas.
was yeah. But I think we're running out of time. Maybe I'll save that for next week.
Oh, now you're going to keep them in suspense.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Anyhow, guys, tonight our guest is Dr. Raymond A. Keller, a lecturer of ancient Greek and Roman culture and civilization and Greco-Roman mythology at West Virginia University in Morgantown. He's recently come out with his second book, Venus Rising, A Concise History of the Second Planet. Dr. Keller's book explores many facets of conditions in life on Venus in many dimensions from a perspective of conspiracies, history, theosophy, ufology, and current events, especially space research. Dr. Leo Sprinkle, and of course, there we go, of the University of Wyoming, wrote the introduction to Dr. Keller's book, and Michael LaRiche of the Coast-to-Coast A.M. radio discussion groups in Northeast Ohio wrote the foreword. The lecture is accompanied by a PowerPoint presentation and followed by a Q&A session. So if anybody's interested in that, they can check that out. If there's anything you ever wanted to know about Venus, now is the time to have your questions answered. Dr. Keller has lived and worked in 44 different countries and has been writing about UFOs since 1967. He's got his doctorate degree from West Virginia University in 2011, focusing on various aspects of Venezuela, and his master's from the same institute in 2004. So he's a very educated man, Lon, and we're going to be talking about
Well, I
Venus.
tell you. this ought to be a very interesting discussion. Ray and I had a bit of a back and forth today about a few things that were in the book, and I'm telling you, the book is fantastic. I didn't know what to expect when I started reading it, but I think everybody's going to be very pleased with what he's put in there. It's a lot of stuff that I didn't know, a lot of conspiracy stuff too. So
And
when we come back, we'll be talking to Ray Keller,
Cosmic Ray. Lon's going to be
Cosmic
taking
Ray.
us to school uh, with Dr. Ray, and we're going to find out about the conspiracies of Venus because I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, and
Yep.
I'm excited about this. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back right after this brief interlude. All right, folks, welcome back. Sean Forker, Lon Strickler, beyond, no, definitely not that. Arcane Radio. Here tonight, we have Dr. Raymond Keller, Cosmic Ray, with us here, and I'm going to step to the side while Lon and Dr. Ray kick this off.
Yeah, Ray, Cosmic Ray or Dr. Keller, but I'm going to call you Ray.
That's
Um,
fine.
Welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you on here after reading this book. It was an amazing book. Uh, why don't you tell us why you wrote this book and some of the misconceptions about Venus?
All righty. Well, I was the publisher and editor of the New Millennial Star. Was a publication back in the 1980s and 1990s as 160 consecutive monthly issues. It was a publication of our group called Outer Space International Research and Investigation Society, OSIRIS. It was a tabloid paper with a circulation of about 7,500, primarily in the San Joaquin Valley in California. Um, and I did a lot of research, extensive research on UFOs and especially the contactee phenomena, those who claim contact with beings from other planets coming to visit us. And I had since gone into teaching. I finished my bachelor's degree and went on to get a master's degree and a doctoral degree and did a lot of traveling to other countries. So I kind of put the UFO stuff on hold. But having gone into the VA hospital and having open heart surgery, I had a quadruple bypass operation. And I thought, hey, it's time for me to get this stuff down on paper. This is important. This is important information that we'll need in the future. And there are a lot of misconceptions about Venus, our second planet. And first, when we think about it, we have the technology ourselves nowadays. In our own material plane of existence, to set up habitats and live in other planetary atmospheres. Maybe those planets might be too hot or too cold, but we have the technology where we can construct underground facilities to protect our astronauts from the elements or from surface conditions, atmospheric conditions, radiation, and so forth. And given the fact that the recent European Space Agency's Venus Express indicated that there may have been advanced life on Venus for as much as 2 billion years, that's plenty of time for any civilization to figure out how they could survive. And even in the third dimension or material level, they could certainly go underground and carry on. But then I also was thinking, are what we being told about Venus by the various space agencies of the world accurate? Because so much of the information that's coming from the former Soviet Union and their Venera program, then continued by the Russian Space Agency. From the United States, the Mariner probes and other probes that we've sent. A lot of this information is very conflicting, and it doesn't really make sense to me. And I discussed some of these scenarios in the book, and be happy to discuss them this evening with you gentlemen.
Well, Ray, I guess the biggest question to ask you is, do you believe that there are Venusians out there?
Oh yes, I certainly do. I think that when we go beyond the curtain of laughter that was imposed on the contactees, George Adamski, Howard Menger, Dana Howard, and others during the 1950s and early 1960s, if we seriously look at what they had to say with an unbiased attitude and an open mind, we see that, hey, they really were onto something. And a lot of the things that they said really make sense and are even being proven today. For example, in Adamski's books, he talks about there being 12 planets in the solar system. And just recently, discoveries were made in Spain and also in Chile at the observatory there in the Atacama desert region that there are trans-Neptunian planets. That there are three more large objects. One is bigger than Pluto, and another one is as big as the Earth that are out in the Kuiper belt, and then also Adamski had written that there were two asteroid belts in our solar system. There, of course, the one that we know of between Mars and Jupiter, but also another one that existed beyond Pluto, and we know, well, that's the Kuiper belt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in your book, I guess the first contactee that you actually start to examine is Hoskin, I guess, Cyril Hoskin, who actually called himself Rampa, I think it was. Can you talk about that a bit?
Oh yes. Well, he was a plumber in England, and one day he just was working in his yard, and he fell off a ladder, suffered a concussion, and he was about to expire when a disembodied spirit of a former Tibetan monk took over his body and just carried on where he left off. Well, he wrote The Third Eye, and he wrote many other books with detailed knowledge about Tibet, Tibetan culture, Tibetan language, and they even used his books at the University of Michigan, at Marquette, and other colleges and universities where they had Tibetan studies programs. And this was basically an illiterate man. I mean, he did have he had some basic knowledge, and he was interested in theosophy, but he wasn't that knowledgeable that he could do all of this on his own. Mm-hmm. And he wrote one of his last books was My Trip to Venus. Tuesday Love Song Rampa was his name, and he talks about being on the Tibetan plateau and ascending a mountainous region with 6 other monks, and boarding a scout craft, being taken up into a mothership, and then passing through some kind of transdimensional warp, which he describes. And it's very interesting because his description of this passage through interdimensionality matches the description given centuries before by Emanuel Swedenborg, the Swedish scientist and theologian, and he also claimed to have traveled to Venus and have met various ascended masters there.
Yeah, I think some of the things that Rampa mentioned, in other words, one of them that really struck me was that the entirety of Earth was a colony for the Brotherhood, and the various extraterrestrial races patrolling the Earth to what they can call, tend to mitigate the effects of atomic radiation, and it was hoped to save people on Earth from blowing the world to pieces. So, we've heard for many, many years of people that speculated that extraterrestrials were actually watching over us so we didn't destroy ourselves. So are the Venetians are the ones actually watching us, or are there various other extraterrestrial races doing that?
Oh yes, there's a whole confederation of various races out there. In fact, recently, I think it was in 2009, the former Canadian Defense Minister Paul Hellyer,
right.
He made some comments while traveling in Russia on a television program there about the existence of some 60 extraterrestrial races that are known to be living among us, and they look, for the most part, they look just like us,
right?
Except for some minor details. But interestingly enough, on one of your prior programs with Mr. Nick Redfern,
right.
you were discussing some of those characteristics.
Yeah, and basically the one we were discussing was the negative RH factor, and that only a small portion of the population, and I think the majority of those come from Central Europe, have that RH negative factor in their blood.
Yes, that is absolutely correct, and that higher concentration is in the Pyrenees Mountains, extending from southwestern France all the way across down to like the ending in the Barcelona region in Spain, and these people have that different physiology. And Mark Kurlansky's book on the history of the Basque people, he goes into great detail about these some of these physiological differences, and explains the mysterious origins of the Basque, that their language doesn't coincide with any of the other Indo-European language groups. Their origin is a mystery, and among the Basques themselves, they believe that they may have been descended from the survivors that escaped from the destruction of the lost continent of Atlantis.
Right.
Which Coe and Menger and others have equated to also having been a Venusian colony at one time.
That and Lemurian colony as well, right? They became warring factions. Yeah.
Yes, the war, the previous Cold War that existed on the Earth. But when you look at the Earth from space, and you look at the Iberian Peninsula, it's very easy to identify, just like the Great Lakes would be. The Great Lakes sort of looks like the heart of the Earth from looking at it and from out in space on a clear day, and it's so easy to identify the Iberian Peninsula as well. And in my own research, I've found out that on each side of the Pyrenees, on the on that side fronting the Atlantic Ocean and the other side fronting the Mediterranean. There was at one time there was a Greek temple to Venus, to Aphrodite on the Mediterranean side, and then there was a Roman temple to Venus on the other side, and it could have been that this was a flight path for incoming spacecraft during prior ages, because it just serves as a natural beacon. And today, most of the UFO sightings in Europe are in fact over Spain and Portugal, and
you're right, they are. Yeah.
Yes, and over Algeria, and also over the countries adjacent across from the Straits of Gibraltar, and then in the United States, you would think it would be California or New Mexico that would be in the lead, but it's not. Ohio is actually in the lead, and that's right in the center of the Great Lakes region. And there's a lot of belief out there that the Great Lake Erie, there may be a saucer base underneath Lake Erie. There's so many reports of unidentified submarine objects that have been cataloged over time. I grew up between the Cleveland area, Bedford, Ohio is my hometown, and Los Angeles, but Ohio is definitely the mecca for incoming spacecraft.
Well, there have over the last, well, I don't know, maybe the last decade or so, there have been a lot of craft captured on film above Lake Erie. A lot of weird motion and lights in the sky. I've also I've been investigating for a while now possible submerged craft entering into Lake Ontario, not far actually from Hamilton. That there may also be a base underwater there as well. But you're right. I mean, Lake Erie itself has had a lot of sightings. Now, you were mentioning, this is kind of off topic, but I just like to have your opinion. Where do you think that Atlantis actually was located?
Oh, I believe that it's just as Plato described it, as beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which would place it somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. And we also look at the structures and formations in the Azores and Madeira and Cabo Verde and other islands in the Atlantic, and it seems that they were once part of something bigger. When we look at the structural formations, geological beneath the sea and the continental plates and so forth in that area, I believe that it was right there, right where Plato said it was.
Okay. Now, in the book, you had stated that these emissaries, or maybe one particular emissary, had stated that maybe NASA or just the government in general has been running a bit of a conspiracy about Venus, and in fact that they were kind of telling us about the surface being uninhabitable, which is not the truth, that there is an habitable zone, at least on surface, on Venus.
Oh, yes. Well, I've done some research in Soviet documents, and I had access. I followed up leads in the Gray Barker collection in Clarksburg, in pursuing these, and discovered that there's a lot of things that that the Soviets were intent on discovering more about Venus. In fact, their whole space program, their unmanned program, was almost exclusively devoted to Venus. They just used the moon in a few initial tests with, unmanned with probes and so forth. But then they sent over, something like 25. While the Soviet Union was around, they sent over 25 missions to Venus. And one of the things that they talked about was the existence that, like Kosarev and others, that they were convinced that Venus had a breathable atmosphere, and actually temperatures that, in some parts, as you said, some parts that could sustain life. And one of the premises that they operated on was based on the fact that gases, they differ in magnetic susceptibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So you have some that are paramagnetic and others that are diamagnetic. And it just happens that oxygen is the most strongly paramagnetic, and carbon dioxide is the most strongly diamagnetic of gases. So so what that means is that the forces involved are small, but if they're combined with a thermal effect or a greenhouse effect, then they should lead to a definite tendency for the carbon dioxide to rise above the oxygen, not the other way around.
Mm.
So what I'm saying is that since Venus is like the Earth in size and mass, it's only 300 miles in diameter less than the Earth, and on a cosmic scale, that's really nothing. So
Right.
the absence of any significant amount of oxygen would be hard to explain. It would have to be somewhere.
Right.
So on the
Well,
whole, you could say that the oxygen is in the lower atmosphere because the carbon dioxide has risen above it. So therefore there should be a breathable atmosphere underneath there by all reckoning. At least in the Soviet conception of why they would dedicate all this time and money and effort to go to Venus rather than Mars, which the Americans assume would be the more hospitable climate.
Well, let's talk about some more of the emissaries. First of all, Adamski's encounter with Orthon. Now, Orthon was supposedly the I guess he was the first emissary to be recognized. In other words, but Adamski actually, he had met with several. Can you explain? Can you talk about Orthon and give us a brief idea of who he was and who he said he was?
Okay, well, Orthon is an entity that identified himself telepathically as coming from the second planet in the solar system, from Venus. He had been in communication with Adamski previously through telepathy, and possibly imparted to him knowledge about space and civilizations there. Earlier in 1946, Adamski wrote a book called Pioneers of Space,
Mm-hmm.
which was a science fiction novel. And while Adamski had, up to that time, he had not been particularly interested in outer space or space phenomena. He was of a receptive mind. He was a member of the Theosophical Society. He had a organized Royal Order of Tibet, and he did programs on Tibetan philosophy and Tibetan Buddhism and so forth. So he was kind of receptive to advanced knowledge or further light and illumination to come. So it's not surprising that our brothers and sisters of other planets would happen to choose him, because they wanted somebody that wouldn't, close their mind to this information and the role that he was being asked to play.
Right. Now let's talk about moving up a little bit. Let's talk about Valiant Thor. Now, I had posted an old article I had about Valiant Thor in the newsletter today, or on the blog today. But of course, what he did takes a little explanation. Hopefully, you can. Well, I know you can explain to the listeners who Valiant Thor was, what he did, and the significance of his trip to Earth.
Yes, during the in 1957, Valiant Thor was sent as an emissary to the United States, to the Pentagon, and he was there for a period of 3 years. He brought various devices with him to prove his extraterrestrial origin. He came with an agenda from the hierarchy of light to convince the leadership in the United States about going out into space, venturing out into space, what they would encounter there, their responsibilities, the existence of a galactic community, and so forth. And this was related by Reverend Frank Strange. He was also a law enforcement official, and he, by various means, ultimately met with Valiant Thor being taken into the Pentagon sort of surreptitiously by a Mrs. Warren. That's the name that they just gave to protect her.
Mm-hmm.
And so he wrote up his account of his meeting with Valiant Thor in a book called Stranger in the Pentagon. Now, what I did in Venus Rising was I had access to all the papers, personal papers, and artifacts of August C. Roberts, who was a photographer in New Jersey, and he's the one who took the pictures of. He's the one who took these pictures of Valiant Thor and 2 other of his crew member when they were at the High Bridge Farm of Howard Menger, the contactee,
Mm-hmm.
and then later on in speaking with Dr. Strange and putting together an accurate account of it. And what I did in Venus Rising in one section was to take the things that were circumstantial to the visit of Valiant Thor, the mothership, the presence of the mothership in the times that he indicated, what evidence was there for it. And I actually found quite a bit. That the arrival of the mothership in 1946, I traced that through observations that were made by the military out in New Mexico at White Sands and others, and that were released or investigated by retired Major Donald E. Kehoe of NICAP about the presence in 1954 and 1955. The United States was tracking not just one but but three unknown satellites that were in orbit around the Earth, in the exact orbit that Valiant Thor described the mothership as being in a particular geostationary orbit. Then later on, the Black Knight, the so-called Black Knight satellite, and then it's the disappearance of the Black Knight satellite from the Earth orbit at the same time that, or relatively a short time after Valiant Thor had left the Pentagon, along with another Venusian contingent of about 70 others here on the Earth at that time. So I actually traced these things to real physical events, and through contacts in California with the New Millennial Star, and we worked very closely with Andy Reese of the Weekly World News, and also Gabriel Green of the Amalgamated Flying Saucer Clubs of America. And I got a lot of information about Valiant Thor from them that I used to fill in the blanks with Strange's story in my book, Venus Rising.
Well, I tell you, your interview with Green and others was very interesting. Can you go over that a little bit? Because this involves Roswell and a few other things that they put together for you.
Oh yes, yes. I'll be delighted to do that. And also, besides just the interview itself, I made sure that it was documented and footnoted, so that as strange and incredible as the dialogue may seem, I mean, it sounds like it's from a Hollywood picture.
Yeah.
But if you pay really close attention and look at the footnotes and see what they're saying, you could tell it's for real.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not it's not a story. It's beyond it's beyond imagination, because it's authentic.
Well, I tell you, before you start talking about it, I will say it floored me. It really did. Because that's why I kept mentioning how well sourced your book was, and it did. Because I went and checked everything as I was reading, and yeah, it's an amazing interview. So I'll let you talk about it.
Oh, okay. I'm going to try to kind of. It's pretty deep, and it's
Right.
long. So I'll try to. I will try to summarize it. There's an individual in the book, and I don't want to give it away, but it's an individual, a friend of Gabriel Green. She is meeting with Andy Reese, myself, and another member of Osiris, and we're outside of Gabriel Green's house in Yucca Valley, California. There's a little, like a private chapel that's not far from there, and Gabe frequently goes there to meet with people and in the UFO community. So we're kind of putting our heads together to find out what's going on with the Venusians, because our friend who traveled from South America to meet with us is intimately connected to the planet Venus. And let me see if I can find that section. I'll read some parts from it. Okay. The book is over 300 pages, and it's fully illustrated, and the pages are large, and so there's definitely a lot of information in here. Okay, here we go. All righty. Well, the lady that we're meeting with helped design. She helped design a dress that was used in the movie Forbidden Planet. I can give you that. I can give you that clue.
Okay.
but I don't want to give it all away because I like.
Yeah, I understand.
I like people to go out and buy this book.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Okay. All right, Deborah. You knew Howard Menger quite well. Did he ever mention any of this to you? Yes, Ray, he did. This is all part of an even bigger cover-up than anyone can imagine. While everyone thought the atomic bomb, which generates an explosion from a single fission reaction, was bad enough, nobody realized that they were already developing and testing thermonuclear two-stage devices as early as 1947. So I'm giving a rationale here for why the Venusians are showing up.
Right.
Why they're showing up as early as 1946. And then Gabe says he recalls a message being transmitted as an override signal across Western European and American television stations throughout the mid-1950s and early 1960s. And the jammer identified himself as a Venusian too. And this was a political message about nuclear disarmament and about caution in the world's geopolitical and military powers in venturing into space, venturing into the Venusians' backyard. Then Andy says, I remember that too. There was a Venusian that went by VOR, V-O-R, and he said it was an acronym that stood for Venusian Observation Ranger. And this was, I don't know if this was a real Venusian or what, but televisions throughout Southern California, across multi-channels, the signals in the VHF band were being blanked out in the 1960s. At the same time that in the 50s, when these conventions were being held out at Giant Rock and talking about nuclear disarmament and peace between the nations. And whether it was a prank or Venusian, we don't know. But then I said, well, in my opinion, that guy should be a superhero. So let's see. Some of the other things in there is talking about the bodies of the crashed aliens. Because earlier I talked about the Jackie Gleason, the article about Jackie Gleason.
Yeah.
That was in the Enquirer in 1983, and about the eight bodies that were at the Air Force Base in Florida.
That was Homestead, right?
Yes, that's right. And so let's see. Okay. All right, Deborah. Also, I might add that Howard explained how the scout craft largely depend on the utilization of electromagnetic lines of force surrounding the Earth. They can only operate in the Earth's atmosphere or in close vicinity to the Earth. Other than that, they are dependent upon the magnetic field of the mothership when on their own in space, but for a limited range. While it was easy enough for the scout craft to be annihilated, being caught up in a thermonuclear explosion, bringing down a mothership would take the power output that could only be generated by a literal Death Star, a Dyson sphere armed with quanta particle beams, an object about the size of Neith, the cloak moon of Venus. I'd have to estimate could probably do the trick. And then Gabe, fortunately for all of us, it will take millennia before the Terrans, Earthlings, reach that level of technological civilization. Okay, and then I asked, I asked Gabe, did the saucers' occupants survive the crashes? And Gabe said, no, not a one. Their bodies were mangled, but not beyond recognition and partial reconstruction. Autopsies revealed that there were some slight eye, facial, finger, and hand characteristics that only a close observer could spot that could distinguish them as alien beings. They were all of average height and relatively human in appearance. There were 4 in each craft. Of the occupants, there were 3 women and 1 man in each saucer. Then I said, that's what Jackie Gleason's wife, that would be June McKittrick, said her husband saw at an Air Force base in Florida, 8 alien bodies in all. And then Yvonne makes a joke and says, well, inquiring minds ought to know.
Because it was an inquirer, right? Yeah. I had to laugh at that myself. So
okay, then
so it is true
okay.
that it is true that Nixon did take Jackie Gleason to see the bodies.
Yes, and then I talk about their transference to the Air Technical Intelligence Recon Center at Dayton, Ohio, from the New Mexico base, that was temporary base that was set up, and asked the question, what did they discover about the aliens that convinced them that they were actually Venusians? And you might recall there was a book by Frank Scully previously about a saucer crash at I think it was Aztec, and
the Aztec.
Yes, and a Venusian connection there. But Gabe says among both the saucer's debris field, some electrical apparatuses were discovered partially intact, thrown at some considerable distance from their respective craft, and sheathed in a durable thermoplastic polymer substance, later duplicated in American labs and known as propylene. Research scientists at International Business Machines in New York City and Radio Corporation of America Labs in Cleveland, Ohio, were given the assignment of restoring at least some of the electronics to working order. RCA succeeded in reactivating a type of television recorder displaying mathematical equations relating to an interplanetary trajectory for the mothership from Venus to Earth, as well as the deployment of scout craft in the vicinity of top-secret American and Soviet military research facilities. Determining the Venusian number system was relatively easy, as it roughly corresponds to our own, but also incorporates a sort of spiral notation matrix. The Venusian alphabet, if you can call it that, was a little more difficult to deal with than the numbers, as it was mostly determined to be a pictographic system, something akin to Egyptian hieroglyphs.
Now, these bodies, or these Venetians, they aren't carbon-based. Was it silicon-based?
Yes, they were silicon-based. So I asked about that. I said, what is it about the alien bodies that set them apart from humans on Earth? And Gabe responded, there are several remarkable differences, but not so outwardly noticeable. First, they didn't have the spiral DNA strands found in nearly all indigenous life forms on Earth. So can you explain that further? Gabe, yes. I mean, their cells were actually composed of lattice crystalline hexagonal structures, similar in composition to the walls of their scout craft. It's almost as though they were artificially constructed beings.
That's what I thought when I read that. Were they actually engineered?
Yes, they were designed to easily and quickly disassemble and reassemble, but their cells were silicon-based rather than carbon-based, and it was conjectured that somehow the hydrogen bomb's implosion and subsequent uranium radiation atmospheric dispersals fused enough of their cells into sheets of a sort of aluminum glass that their disassembly, reassembly capabilities were impeded. And then I found some information from the report revealed by Donald E. Kehoe in Flying Saucers Are Real concerning Project Sign. And I was able to read some of the Project Sign report and went into detail about this, explaining how the beings of a silicon nature are equated with Venus. So I'll just read some of this, just a little bit of it. As to the possibilities of life on the planet Venus revealed in the Sign report, Kehoe quotes, since flying saucers first hit the headlines almost 2 years ago, there has been a widespread speculation that the aerial phenomena might actually be some form of penetration from another planet, the possibility of intelligent life also existing on the planet Venus is not considered completely unreasonable by astronomers. The atmosphere of Venus apparently consists mostly of carbon dioxide with deep clouds of formaldehyde droplets, and there seems to be little or no water. Yet, scientists concede that living organisms might develop in chemical environments which are strange to us. This is from Project Time, to the Air Force. Venus, however, has two handicaps. Her mass and gravity are nearly as large as the Earth. Mars is smaller, and her cloudy atmosphere would discourage astronomy and space travel. But Kehoe effectively argues against those who lean counter to the Venus option because of that planet's high gravity and cloudy atmosphere, noting that the last argument, I thought, did not have too much weight. We were planning to escape the Earth's gravity. This was simple rocketry. As for the cloudy atmosphere, they could have developed some system of radio or radar investigation of the universe. The Navy research units I knew were, even at that time, probing the far-off Crab Nebula in the Milky Way with special radio devices. The same method, or something far superior, could have been developed on Venus or on other planets surrounded by constant clouds. Also, one of the prominent astronomical authorities consulted by the Air Force personnel at Project Sign was Dr. H. Spencer Jones, the Astronomer Royal of the British Isles. The Sign report goes on to state that, quote, in his book, Life on Other Worlds, Dr. Jones points out that everything about us is a result of changing processes begun millennium ago and still going on. We cannot define life solely in our own terms. It can exist in unfamiliar forms. In the book, Dr. Jones elaborates, it is conceivable that we could have beings, the cells of whose bodies contain silicon instead of the carbon, which is an essential difference between the constitution of those cells and the cells of which animal and plant life on the Earth are built up. They might be able to exist at temperatures so high that no types of terrestrial life could survive. Therefore, at least according to Dr. Jones, life could be possible on other worlds hotter and drier than ours, a planet like Venus, for example. So the thing about this is just remember that this report, Project Sign report, was written 1 year after the New Mexico crashes. The Project Sign newly created Air Force report, 1948. And it was written by government insiders with both a need to know and access to at least some of the data.
Well, now, one thing I do want to ask you about, now the bodies were said to be at Homestead. Now, Homestead right now is not there. I mean, that hurricane, I don't forget what hurricane it was, Alex took it out. I've been told now through a few sources of mine that the bodies are now at Eklund in Florida. Have you ever heard anything about that?
No, I haven't heard about the transfer. Of those bodies.
Yeah, this is what I've been told. Actually, I had two people tell me this, and I don't know I can't really say what basis it was that information came from, but that you were right that they went to Wright-Patterson first, and then they were stored somewhere in Florida. I didn't know anything about the Homestead, but I was told that as of the year was maybe 10 years ago, that they were at Eklund Air Force Base. Now, I don't know what kind of facility they have there now, but,
I wouldn't be surprised if they were somewhere back out west, either in underground in New Mexico or possibly in Utah or Nevada.
Well, now the one thing about this about this crash, about the Roswell crash, and that you mentioned in there were the insectoids, and more
Yes.
specifically the bees. Can you
Yes.
explain that?
Yes. Well, in the book, and it's interesting because a large segment of readers and purchasers of this book are beekeepers. but going back to the very first UFO book that was ever published, Flying Saucer, as they were called back in the day, was by Gerald Hurd. Riddle of the Flying Saucers, and he proposed. He was an associate of Timothy Leary, Huxley, and others that were on the cutting edge of societal change, and
Right.
also various professors of comparative religions. So when he's not just some quack writing this book, but he seriously proposed that the flying saucers were manned by bees, intelligent bees, coming from other planets in our solar system, and so when we go back into history, we see that this isn't really so far-fetched after all. The theosophists and the Sufis, for example, believed that the bees were brought to the earth originally from Venus some 18 to 25 million years ago. And despite all the evolutionary and geological changes that have occurred with other species and with our planet, the bees have remained relatively constant. Then we look at the organization of the hive. We see that Tesla himself, Nikola Tesla, who has a lot of Venusian connections, was obsessed with bees. He wrote a lot about bees, the organization of the hive, and the collectivization of society and so forth. And he believed that the beehive was a great model for us to follow. In the days of the troubadours, the Sufis, in the days of the Crusades, when the Crusaders, there were 4 different Crusades that were launched from Europe into the Middle East, and naturally, Islam then, as now, it's not a monolithic thing. There was a lighter side to it, a more accepting side in the Sufis. They're like a mystical branch of Islam, and they believed that the key to receiving revelation, was from the bees, and that the bees were very sacred. So this knowledge, and they also believed there was a connection of the bees with the divine feminine and the planet Venus.
Mm-hmm.
But when the Crusaders came back, and then the movement among the troubadours and so forth later evolved into the religion of the Cathars, they also revered the bee and associated it with the divine feminine and with Venus. And there was a purge of the Cathars because they had set up communes in France, in southern France, and in Italy, where they wanted to model their whole society on a beehive, and they wanted to collectivize and have a queen and run everything just like a beehive. And they set up these utopian communities. Mm-hmm. So obviously the church couldn't let that stand. It's too much of a competition. So they literally went in and massacred whole communities of these people. But the symbology of the bee, of the divine nature of the bee, goes back to through Babylon, through Egypt. It exists in esoteric societies. It's in Mormonism. They call Utah is the beehive state. They have the statue of the beehive on the Capitol steps. It's sacred or it's respected in Masonry and so forth. So there's a definite connection of the bees with the planet Venus that has already been established in a historical context beyond just Helena Blavatsky and the theosophy. So this is this is a real thing. But in the context of this, I look at a lot of things and equate it to the bees, like the crop circles. There are many that have a pattern of a Fibonacci, and I have a picture of the crop circle. The way you determine the amount of bees in a hive, it's always going to be a Fibonacci number. And the Fibonacci number is representative of the divine feminine. And why is it representative of the divine feminine? Because in the ancient esoteric schools of wisdom, they plotted the orbit of. They knew a lot more about science than we give them credit for. They plotted the orbit of the Earth and Venus and saw that for every 8 orbits of Venus around the sun, there were exactly 5. So that of the Earth, so that 8-to-5 ratio is in the Fibonacci sequence. And when you look at how the beehive is patterned and so forth, and you see and you calculate by the different types of bees, you see that it's always the number of bees in a hive always works out to be a Fibonacci number. So I explain that in the book, as well as the orbital symmetries, the origin of the pentagram, also in the 5 close conjunctions of Venus with the Earth in the 8-year Venusian cycle, and so it really gets deep into all this stuff about the bees.
Now, weren't you told that that in the spacecraft that actually crashed at Roswell, that there were 3 to 5 foot bees in these craft?
Yes, there were bees found that were embedded in the literally embedded in the walls of the craft.
Huh.
And they were taken to Texas A&M University to a special center where they study bees.
Those are some big bees.
Well, you know what? I tell you, the show's we've got to reach that time at the end of the show. I think we're going to have Ray come back on with us sometime, because there's just so much to talk about, let alone David Bowie is part of this as well, that he may have had a bit of Venusian as well, which kind of seems appropriate for the times. It's a very interesting book. It really is. And the fact that another thing too, I mean, a connection to like the Book of Enoch, where they called the mantis, the insectoids, as the watchers, that they were the watcher beings that came down to watch over humans.
Oh yes, and I tie that into the Kolob Stargate of the Mormons.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And
it's an interesting book. I mean, it really is. I highly recommend it. It's just so much in there. You just no way you can talk about it in an hour. But
It's the Texas A&M Honeybee Research Lab at College Station.
Oh, okay. Texas A&M. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Ray, I tell you, it was great having you on with us. This is a lot of interesting stuff. We really didn't even get into much of any of it. We got, I guess, the the main points, but there's a lot more there. Is it possible you come back with us one time?
Oh yes, Lon and Sean, no problem. I would love to. I think your program is really on the cutting edge. I know that that your audience is ever growing and is into the arcane and the paranormal to a degree not seen in other programs. So I would be delighted.
Well, we appreciate that. We do. Okay, Ray. Well, thanks again, and we'll be in contact with you.
All righty, gentlemen, and may the effulgent light of Venus forever be your guiding star.
Okay, thank you. Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Ray Keller, folks. Lon, you really took it away there.
Well, I mean, tell you, there's a lot. I was fascinated with a lot of what was in the book. It was, just so much there, and some of the connections that he makes in the conspiracy theories as well. Talking about discussing just like J. Allen Hynek and his connection to secret government programs that people really didn't know about. I mean, it's just fascinating. It really is. There's a lot there.
Well, I was absorbing as much as I could. I need to read the book.
Yeah, I suggest it highly.
And the book, of course, is called Venus Rising and written by Dr. Raymond Keller. Folks, you've been listening to Arcane Radio. Sean Forker, Lon Strickler. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week. Lon, who's our guest?
We have Brett Oldham coming on, and he is a contactee and experiencer.
Well, there you go, folks. More aliens next week. You all be good now. Good night, everybody.